Part 3. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jin Kui. Chapter 21. Gu Yunjiao closed the box. Second aunt has cooked rice in a while, and when she drains the rice soup, you can bring me a bowl and bring it to me. Sanya nodded. She liked her sister-in-law very much. They both slept in the same bed every day. Gu Yunjiao tucked her quilt at night, and combed her hair during the day. She is willing to listen to her sister-in-law. After a while, Sanya went to the kitchen. Watching Yang draining the rice soup, Sanya ran away quickly. Yang scolded behind him, "Damn girl, I'll keep this rice soup for Shiro to drink, just you." Fortunately, the bottom of the bowl was thick and not hot to the hands. Sanya brought the rice soup into the room. She thought that Gu Yunjiao wanted to drink it, but Gu Yunjiao found an old plain handkerchief. The handkerchief is a silk handkerchief. Before her father disappeared, life at home was actually pretty good. Gu Yunjiao dipped the silk handkerchief in the hot rice soup and began to wipe the gold needles. Sanya clapped her hands beside her. "Yeah, it's on right away." Gu Yunjiao smiled at her and continued to wipe. After rubbing all the gold needles to sparkle, Gu Yunjiao stopped and put away the gold needles. She closed the box, put it in the box, and locked it again. In the main room, Mrs. Yang shouted, "It's time to eat." Gu Yunjiao was leading Sanya out, just in time to see Zhang Yuzi also leading Liaolang out. She smiled at Zhang Yuzi, turned around and entered the main room. The two tables in the main room have been set. Gu Yunjiao helped to serve the rice. At this time, Zhang Erlang came in from the outside, walked behind Gu Yunjiao and bumped her with his arm, and said in a low voice, "I said earlier, you can't run away. Later, let's see how I deal with you." When Zhang Yuzi saw Erlang bump into Gu Yunjiao, he frowned, stopped Zhang Erlang, and said coldly, "Second brother, what are you doing? Don't blame me for being rude to you if you harass your sister-in-law in the future." Zhang Erlang glanced at him, smiled awkwardly, and sat down by himself. "Everyone is here, let's have dinner." Gu Yunjiao is sitting on the left of the Chen family, and on the right is Sanya. Halfway through the meal, old man Zhang said on the table next door, "The day after tomorrow is the festival, and when the festival is over, we will start harvesting the millet. The old lady cooks for the past few days, and the rest go to the ground." He paused for a moment. "All the strength, if anyone dares to be lazy, I can't spare him." Gu Yunjiao eats silently. She doesn't know how to do farm work, not even in 2 lifetimes. 10 acres of her family's land have always been cultivated by tenants. At that time, if she is clumsy, she doesn't know if she will be judged as lazy by Mr. Zhang. When the old man finished speaking, Zhou continued, "There is something else. Erlang is also 18 this year, so it's time to talk about his wife. The family is not well off now, and this marriage will cost a lot of money. I discussed it with the old man, and let Erlang marry Dalan's wife, so that you can save a dowry money and save a mouth for eating. Many rural families are too poor to have money to marry. In order to save money, it is not uncommon for the uncle to marry the widowed sister-in-law." Gu Yunjiao's hand holding the chopsticks tightened. She looked up at Zhang Erlang at the other table. No wonder he said that before. Zhang Erlang was also looking at the side and gave Gu Yunjiao a malicious smile. Gu Yunjiao lowered her eyes and chewed slowly. She would never marry a beast like Zhang Erlang. Chen Shi was stunned for a few seconds, then suddenly put down the bowl. "No, Erlang can't marry Yunjiao." Everyone in the room looked at Chen. Gu Yunjiao also turned her head to look at her. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jin Kui. Chapter 22. Chen Shi waved his hand. "I wanted to give Dalan a blessing, but you all disagreed. The dowry money for marrying Yunjiao was taken by me as my dowry, not my family's money. Why take my dowry money to marry the second wife?" She snorted heavily. "Even if you want to marry Yunjiao, it will be my Saburo, and Saburo is 17. Hearing his mother's words, Zhang Yuzi choked a mouthful of vegetable soup into his throat, coughing non-stop, his whole face flushed red from coughing. Gu Yunjiao still lowered her eyes and said nothing. Mr. Zhang said sternly on the next table, nonsense. San Lang is going to marry a young lady from an official family in the future, how can he marry a widow? The corner of Yang's mouth twitched when she heard this, which clearly meant that her Erlang was not as good as Saburo. Although it was true, it was still uncomfortable. Chen Shi said with conviction, even if Saburo doesn't marry, then Yunjiao is still in our big room. Anyway, I don't agree with this. Both Mr. Zhang and Mrs. Zhou didn't look good. Both of them forgot that the dowry money was taken by the Chen family. The dowry is a woman's private property, so it's really not easy to force the Chen family. At this time, Zhang Erlang said, then give the auntie 5 taels of silver. When the words fell, Mrs. Yang called out, who would marry a widow for 5 taels of silver? Even if it is a serious marriage, the dowry is only 2 or 3 taels of silver. When Gu Yunjiao heard this, half of her heart was relieved. As long as the Chen family doesn't let go, according to the virtues of the Zhang family, it is impossible to marry her with 5 taels of silver. Just thinking about it, Yang Shi suddenly called out affectionately, Yunjiao. You are still young, you are only 14 years old, you can't keep Dalan for a lifetime. Look at my Erlang, who is not only well-born, but also strong. You won't suffer if you marry him. Gu Yunjiao raised her eyelids and pointed to the black circle around her neck, second aunt thinks I'm impatient. Yang was speechless for a while. Chen Shi said loudly, don't mention this in the future. Erlang wants to marry a daughter-in-law, so he will go to the matchmaker and talk to him. Don't hit my Yunjiao's idea. Yang's yin and yang said angrily, sister-in-law, we haven't separated yet, what about yours and mine? Even if it's a funeral, even if Yunjiao took your dowry money to marry, so what? Over the years, Saburo's money for studying flowers has been in the dozens of taels. It's all the money in the middle of the flowers. Now, for the 5 taels of silver, you've been arguing with your family. Does this make sense? Gu Yunjiao's hand holding the chopsticks tightened, and the heart that she had just put down was lifted up again. Zhou Shi said at this time, the second daughter-in-law is right. This means that the Chen family should not care about the 5 taels of silver. Chen Shi turned to look at Gu Yunjiao at this moment. Gu Yunjiao lowered her eyes and thought to herself. She married into this family, but it's only been more than 2 months. To be honest, she hasn't had any relationship with anyone yet. Although Chen's defending her, Chen's maintenance is definitely limited. She would not pin all her hopes on Chen. Looking at Gu Yunjiao, Chen Shi clearly felt that she had a touch of determination on her face. Chen Shi sighed in his heart, if Erlang is a good person, she will not stop her today. But Erlang is full of bad water. He was discovered by people who peeked at the widows in the village before taking a bath, and liked to hang out with some random people. What's more, he gave Gu Yunjiao such a heavy hand last time. If Yunjiao married him, she would be killed by him in a few years. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 23. Chen Shi quickly made up his mind, it's not just about money. My eldest son has only been gone for a few days. The period of filial piety hasn't passed yet, so you can count on his wife. Is this something a human can do? Needless to say, Yunjiao wants to keep the festival for Dalan, so don't make this idea. Mrs. Yang glanced at Mrs. Zhou, whose face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and said gloatingly, sister-in-law, this is my mother's idea. Now, you dare to scold my mother. Chen Shi didn't know well, so he quickly made up for it. Mother, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about Erlang and his sister-in-law. Mrs. Zhou could have pretended to be deaf and dumb, but Mrs. Yang made her lose face by revealing her words. She sneered at Mrs. Chen, who else do you see in your eyes now? Sanlang hasn't won the championship yet, you're crazy in this family. One day, if Saburo becomes an official and earns you an official life, you won't be able to go to heaven. Chen's face was red and ears were red, and he said calmly, Mother, I really didn't go for you. Gu Yunjiao wanted to say something for the Chen family, but she knew her status in this family, and she was very soft-spoken. This opening was likely to add fuel to the fire. She couldn't help but look at Zhang Yuzi. Zhang Yuzi said at this moment, Grandma, Mother is a fast talker, how dare she disrespect you, don't care about her. As usual, when Zhang Yuzi opened his mouth, the Zhou family would definitely give him this face. Zhang Yuzi is famous, and his position in the family was second only to Mr. Zhang, and no one dared not listen to what he said. But now because he has no exams, Zhou Shi is still holding his breath. She snorted coldly, you are not much better than your mother, you are all the same. Zhang Yuzi lowered his eyes, and when he raised his eyes again, he smiled again, as long as Grandma can calm down, she can swear a few more words. At this time, Mr. Zhang coughed heavily, don't say a few words when you eat. He couldn't just watch his wife offend Saburo. Although Saburo didn't take the test this time, in 3 years, with Saburo's knowledge, it is a must. He didn't take it for granted, it was a man from Fukan who came to the county for inspection. After examining Saburo's knowledge, he said, with this son's talent and learning, he will be successful in autumn, and even in spring in the coming year. Therefore, the whole family is sure that Saburo will become an official in the future. Although he is a pro-grandson, it is not easy to offend him. The room fell silent except for the sound of chewing. After eating, Chen Shi walked into the house with his head down. Gu Yunjiao quickly followed. Chen Shi entered the room and sat beside the bed sulking. Gu Yunjiao walked over and said softly, Mother, I'm sorry, I made you feel wrong today because of me. When people are wronged, they are most afraid of being comforted. When Gu Yunjiao said this, Mrs. Chen's eyes were red. She waved her hand, choked and said, I don't blame you. This family was originally like this, I've seen it through a long time ago. She said with tears, you don't know how difficult it was for our mother and son when Dalan's father died. At that time, Dalan was 12 years old, and Saburo was only 10 years old. He accidentally won the appreciation of Master Yuan in the village, and he would rather let him study without cultivating. But even so, I don't do it at home. It is said that when Saburo went to study, there was one less farmer. I was forced to die, and it was Dalan who said he would do the work of 2 people alone, so they reluctantly agreed. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 24. In those years, Dalan's grandparents didn't like to see me, and always said that Dalan's father was my death, so he scolded him. I was caught and beaten by Erlang several times on the way, and once his head was broken, and now there is a small scar in his hair. Dalan and I are rushing to do things at home. I'm afraid they say that no one is working, so Saburo will not be allowed to study. Dalan is still a child, so he has to do heavy work. The root of the disease can't be said to have fallen from that time. Afterwards, Saburo was very good, and he was valued by the head of the county academy, and asked him to go to the county to study. For the sake of the study, he made a lot of trouble. In the end, I became my own jewelry and gave Saburo a bunch of repairs. It wasn't until the second year that Saburo won the first place in the academy exam. The old man heard about it and felt that Saburo would have a future in the future, so he gave money to Saburo to study. They are willing to pay, but they are just waiting for Saburo to become an official so that they can enjoy his glory. Don't look at me talking hard at home now, it all started after Saburo passed the Zyuki exam the year before last. Why do you think I'm ashamed today? It's not because Saburo didn't take the exam this time. They didn't dare to get mad at Saburo, and they were all mad at me. Guyunjiao sat down beside Chen's, handed her a handkerchief, and said softly, "Mother is tired." She took the veil and wiped away her tears, and laughed at herself. What do I say this? Now that Saburo is old and promising, and life is getting better, I just feel sorry for my Dalin. She grabbed Guyunjiao's hand. At that time, the doctors in the county and Drsu in the town said that they were not optimistic about Dalin's illness, and also said that if your father was still there, Dalin might be saved by your father's medical skills. Your father, why did your father disappear inexplicably, my darling? Said Chen Shi and burst into tears. Zhang Yuzi stood at the base of the window, his eyes were lowered, and his eyes were slightly moist. Mother and eldest brother have given him a lot, and he will never be able to repay their kindness in his life. Guyunjiao comforted Chen Shi softly and carefully wiped her tears. When she finished crying, Guyunjiao went out and planned to get some hot water to wash Chen Shi's face. When she went out, she saw Zhang Yuzi outside. Her eyes seemed a little red. She looked at him. Zhang Yuzi turned his face and walked quickly. Guyunjiao poured hot water over to wash Chen's face. After Chen Shi finished packing herself, she pulled Guyunjiao to sit down and patted her hand. "You are good, but my boss is not lucky. Actually, I already thought about it, but I haven't told you yet. You are still young, and the days to come are still very long. It will be too hard for you to keep Dalin for a lifetime. I'm thinking of you giving Dalin a festival for 3 years, and then setting you free. What do you think?" She lost her own husband, so she naturally knew how difficult it was for a widow, and she didn't want to embarrass Guyunjiao. Guyunjiao's body trembled slightly. 3 years. 3 years was a little long for her, but she wasn't in a hurry to get married, mainly because the big Zhang family was not easy to get along with. Not to mention that there is still Zhang Erlang who is eyeing him. It's just that since Chen Shi said that, she can't refute it. After all, Chen Shi made her keep the festival for a lifetime, and in this era, she deserves her due. Besides, she is also very grateful for Chen's protecting her like this. Just repay Chen's maintenance. Guyunjiao nodded. "Okay, I'll listen to my mother. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth." Author, Jinkui. Chapter 25. At this time, in the West Wing, Mrs. Yang was also comforting Zhang Erlang, who had a gloomy face. "Don't worry, when the millet is beaten, I will go to find the money matchmaker in the next village and let her find a good one for you." Seeing that his son was still unhappy, Yang said again, "Do you still think about the Death Star? She's so skinny, she doesn't have any flesh on her body. What's there to worry about? Don't worry, mother will let the money matchmaker find you a good ass so that you can have a good life." Zhang Erlang didn't answer, and went out with a sullen face. He didn't insist on marrying Guyunjiao, but he still thought about it after he didn't eat the meat. What's more, Guyunjiao made him suffer a big loss, and this revenge has not yet been avenged. When he remembered it, his arm was aching again. Guyunjiao came out of Chen's room, just as Zhang Erlang came out from the opposite west wing. The two looked at each other across the yard, and Guyunjiao turned back to her room with a blank face. Sanya was playing with the rope alone in the room. Guyunjiao patted her head and smiled. "Don't let Grandpa see you playing this. The autumn harvest is coming. If it rains, Grandpa will beat you." The local old man said that it was going to rain when turning the flower rope. Sanya stuck out her tongue and quickly put away the rope. Just then, there was a cry from the courtyard outside. Guyunjiao looked out the window, and saw Rokuro running towards the room with one hand raised unnaturally. Zhang Yuzi responded very quickly. ran out of the room and asked, "What's the matter, why are you crying?" Lu Lang put his finger under Zhang Yuzi's eyelids. "Wu, I was bitten by a centipede, it hurts." Chen Shi also came out of the room at this time, grabbed Lu Lang's hand and glanced at it, and exclaimed, "Ah, this centipede is not too poisonous, and the hand is swollen." Lu Lang was just crying in pain, but when he heard Chen Shi said that it was poisonous, he cried more and more, "Woo, I'm going to be poisoned to death, woo, I don't want to die dash." This cry made Chen Shi also panic. She knew that centipedes were generally not too poisonous, and they were unlikely to endanger her life. She still began to tremble all over, and people couldn't stand up. She lost her husband first, then lost her eldest son, and if something happened to her younger son, she really couldn't survive. Zhang Yuzi quickly supported her. Gu Yunjiao hurriedly came out of the room and looked at Rokuro's hand first. There was an obvious wound on Rokuro's index finger, blood was still oozing out, and the wound was already red and swollen. "What about the centipede that bit you?" she asked. Rokuro's cry paused for a while, then he pointed to the door of the yard to the right. "There, I was trampled to death." He had just come to play with the centipede, but who knew he was bitten by it? Gu Yunjiao ran to the gate of the yard with her skirt, and picked up the red-headed centipede that was crushed by Rokuro. The centipede was not small, about 10 centimeters long. There is a mountain behind the village, and the centipede in the mountain is particularly large. As she walked into the house with the centipede, she called Rokuro, "Come in, I'll give you medicine." Rokuro raised his hands stiffly and came in crying. Chen Shi was also helped by Zhang Yuzi into the house. Gu Yunjiao called Sanya, "Turn on the lamp." Sanya picked up the scythe on the table and skillfully lit the oil lamp. Gu Yunjiao sat down, carefully pulled off the pliers next to the centipede's head, and then smeared the juice from the broken part of the pliers on Rokuro's hand. Gu Yunjiao broke both pliers off, and all the juice smeared on Rokuro's wound. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 26. Chen Shi and Zhang Yuzi watched from the side. Seeing that Gu Yunjiao was not flustered at all, Ms. Chen felt a lot more settled, but she hesitantly said, "Does this help?" Gu Yunjiao nodded, "It should be useful, my grandfather." She paused and recalled that her grandfather in this life was also a doctor, so there was nothing wrong with her. Only then did he continue, "Centipedes are blind medicinal materials. In the past, in order to ensure the efficacy of medicinal materials, many of the medicinal materials we used at home were collected and processed by ourselves. This method was told to my grandfather by an old man in the mountains who brings centipedes to my family every year." Just as he was talking, Rokuro suddenly called out, "Mother, I don't have the pain anymore." Chen Shi said in surprise, "It doesn't hurt anymore." Rokuro nodded again and again, "It doesn't hurt at all." Zhang Yuzi stared at Rokuro's hand, the redness and swelling seemed to be starting to subside. The whole family stared at Rokuro's fingers. After a while, the redness and swelling subsided, but there were still some residual blood stains. Chen Shi patted his chest, "My God, it scared me to death." After she finished speaking, she quickly revived with full blood, and got up and pinched Rokuro's ear, "I'll call you Pi. That centipede, scorpion, etc. are poisonous, so can that be played with? If it weren't for your sister-in-law today, I wouldn't have poisoned you." Her other hand greeted Rokuro's ass, "Is it still skinny in the future? Do you dare to play with this mess?" Rokuro raised his eyebrows and eyes, and shouted, "Oh, oh, oh." Sanya giggled beside him, and Gu Yunjiao couldn't help laughing. Zhang Yuzi smiled slightly when he saw the liveliness in the room. The moment he supported Chen's just now, he was really worried that something happened to his brother and his mother would fall down completely. Fortunately she has her at home. Lu Lang gave Zhang Yuzi a wink while screaming. Zhang Yuzi held back his smile and poured a glass of water for Chen's. Mother is tired, drink a glass of water first. Chen Shi was distracted, and his hands relaxed. Rokuro twisted his body and ran away. Seeing Rokuro's back disappearing at the door, Mrs. Chen hurriedly shouted, "It's getting dark, just play in the yard, don't run around." She sat down and took a sip of water, and said angrily to Zhang Yuzi, "You are still protecting him, this kid deserves to be beaten." He said to Gu Yunjiao again, "Thanks to you, otherwise." Gu Yunjiao smiled, "Mother doesn't have to do this for a small matter, I'll go get some water, and I'll wash Lu Lang's hands later." She got up and went to the kitchen to draw a basin of water, rubbed some soap horns in it, put it under the window root, and beckoned to Rokuro who was playing in the yard. Lu Lang ran over, Gu Yunjiao grabbed his hand and washed it in the basin. Chen's voice talking to Zhang Yuzi came from the room, "When are you going to the county academy?" Zhang Yuzi thought for a while, "Let's go after the autumn harvest." Chen Shi frowned, "Didn't your grandfather say that you hold a pen in your hand, so you won't be allowed to do farm work?" Zhang Yuzi smiled apologetically at Chen's, "Mother, this year is different." Chen was silent for a while. "Yes, this year is different. Da Fang lacks the strong labor of Dallin, and Saburo fails to pass the exam. If there is no more effort in the autumn harvest, it is unreasonable." Chen Shi nodded for a while, "That's it, then go to the county to study after the autumn harvest is over. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth." Author, Jinkui. Chapter 27. At night, Gu Yunjiao was lying on the bed, over and over thinking about her thoughts. She is still in the stage of puberty, and her top priority is to take good care of her body and grow fat, otherwise it will be too late after this period. This body is actually pretty good, but it's just that in the past 6 months, there have been consecutive changes, and the standard of living has plummeted, so the body has become thinner. But the trouble now is that in this family, although rice and vegetables can basically be eaten, she needs to supplement protein, that is, eat meat. She recalled that there was a butcher's shop in a town 2 miles away from here. The trouble is that even if you buy meat, it is not convenient to cook and eat it. This family is like a wolf, and she is not willing to take advantage of those people. How to do it? Gu Yunjiao suddenly thought of her own medicine store. She had tried it, and she could put things outside. Otherwise, she would make a pot inside and eat meat by herself. Soon she rejected the idea again. The medicine store was set at a constant temperature and humidity, because many Chinese medicinal materials were prone to mold and insects. Now it's a confined space, and cooking in it, I'm afraid the fumes won't get out. Gu Yunjiao was worried and couldn't think of a good solution for a while. A day later is the Mid-Autumn Festival. The Zhang family celebrates the Mid-Autumn Festival, which is no different from usual. Not to mention mooncakes, even the dishes on the table didn't add a single one. It can be seen that everyone is a little dissatisfied, but no one dares to say it. Early the next morning, before dawn, Mr. Zhang knocked on the pot in the yard, waking up the whole family. Everyone was busy eating the multi-grain cakes that were fried last night, and stepped into the fields in the just bright sky. Mr. Zhang didn't say anything that Zhang Yuzi's hands couldn't do farm work, and when he got to the field, he split the sickle. Thank goodness, there are 6 sickles in the family, the second uncle and the third uncle, Zhang Erlang Zhang Yuzi, are all strong laborers, and each person has a sickle. The old man Zhang is strong, and he is also a good worker. He took a sickle himself, and gave the rest to Shiro. Shiro is 15 this year, and even though he looks thin, he is not lacking in strength. The women and children of the family were arranged to thresh the grain. The Chen family asked Gu Yunjiao and De Yaer to pick up the millet that fell on the ground. Picking up millet is much easier than harvesting, that is, you have to get up and squat or bend over constantly. Across the ridge is the Zhang family's field. De Hua, the newly married daughter-in-law of the Zhang family's eldest son, only entered the door a few days earlier than Gu Yunjiao. Homely. This is Gu Yunjiao's only friend in Qingshan village. Peach Blossom was also arranged to pick up the millet. At this time, the sky was already bright, and she happened to be picking it up by the ridge, and Gu Yunjiao was not far away, so she picked up the millet while gossiping with her. Gu Yunjiao agreed, haha, and kept busy with her hands. Peach Blossom said mysteriously, I heard that the elder Zhao Li is going to find a marriage for his youngest son, and has entrusted the money matchmaker from the next village. Gu Yunjiao responded casually and suddenly remembered that the matchmaker Qian was her second aunt. Peach Blossom looked envious. It would be a blessing for anyone to marry into his family has a lot of fields, and his youngest son is an old man. The pain in the family is like eyeballs. It is said that he is determined to find a good one for him. Woolen cloth. De Hua said and threw down the millet in her hand, stood up, oh, picking up the millet caught my head dizzy, she fell to the ground before she finished speaking. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jin Kui. Chapter 28. Gu Yunjiao stared at the millet in the field, and when she heard De Hua's words were half silent, she turned her head and saw that De Hua fell to the ground. She hurriedly put the millet in her hand into the bamboo basket, got up and crossed the field ridge, just about to help up the peach blossom, when the peach blossom's mother-in-law Qin also ran over and saw the peach blossom lying unconscious in the field, without saying a word, among those who stretched out their hands to pinch peach blossoms. Gu Yunjiao had to let go. Qin Shi pinched it hard. De Hua let out a breath, and woke up leisurely. She looked at the sky above her head. What's wrong with me? Qin Shi only thought that De Hua wanted to be lazy, and said angrily, if you pretend to be dizzy when you do such a little work, you know you are lazy. Get up for me. He reached out to pull her up. De Hua propped herself up and sat on the ground, tears welling in her eyes. Mother, I didn't. Gu Yunjiao stopped Qin Shi. Auntie, don't let her get up in a hurry, let her slow down first. After speaking, Gu Yunjiao squatted down, took De Hua's hand on her lap, and cut her pulse. Qin Shi looked at Gu Yunjiao suspiciously. You can see a doctor. Gu Yunjiao nodded, then focused on the pulse. Several men from the Zhang family came over from a distance when they saw something happened. The women and children of the Zhang family also ran over to watch. Seeing that Gu Yunjiao was taking her pulse, Mrs. Yang said with a cut, Sang Mengxing, you pretend to be a doctor. Lu Shi blinked and said nothing. Chen Shi did not dare to speak for fear of disturbing Gu Yunjiao. After a while, Gu Yunjiao let go of her hand, stood up, and said to the Qin family, congratulations, auntie, there are peach blossoms. What? Qin Shi couldn't believe it. This is what she meant. Zhang Jiadalan is much more direct. He squatted beside De Hua and held her head in his arms. Yes, De Hua, we have a child. Peach Blossom is both wronged and happy. Her mother-in-law just said that she was pretending to be dizzy and lazy, and she fell on her man's knee and began to cry. At this time, Qin Shi also knew that she was wrong to blame De Hua, and said with a smile, Peach Blossoms, mother is in a hurry, don't blame mother. You, since you are not feeling well, go to the house to rest first. Peach Blossom raised her head and nodded somewhat shyly and proudly. Zhang Jiadalan carefully helped Peach Blossom up. I'll carry you. Seeing his son's cautious appearance, Qin Shi suddenly became unhappy again, and said sourly, you met a mother-in-law like me. When I was pregnant with Dalan, she was almost born and went to the ground. De Huaxin knew that her mother-in-law was a little dissatisfied, her face flushed, and she pushed Zhang Jiadalan away. I'm better, I can go by myself. At this time, Yang Shi said yin and yang strangely beside him, yo, do you all believe it? She's a little girl, and her hair hasn't even grown yet. She said she would have it. Do you believe her too? As soon as these words came out, Peach Blossom's footsteps couldn't move. Zhang Jiadalan also stopped. Qin's expression also became hesitant. Chen Shi pulled Gu Yunjiao over and snorted, believe it or not, our family's Yunjiao's medical skills are good. Don't forget, who is Yunjiao's father in our family? Qin Shi patted her thigh, no, Dr. Gu's medical skills are famous in several counties, and Yunjiao only needs to learn a little bit, it's amazing. At this time, Lu Lang also shouted loudly, that's right, my sister-in-law is very powerful. I was bitten by a centipede yesterday, my hand was swollen, and I was almost poisoned to death, and my sister-in-law cured me right away. Gu Yunjiao looked at Lu Lang and laughed, can we not speak so exaggeratedly? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 29. Dehua said to Qin Shi at this time, Mother, come here, I will tell you. Qin Shi came over, Dehua whispered in her ear, I think it's true, I forgot, I haven't changed for nearly 2 months. Qin Shi was convinced now, and smiled at Gu Yunjiao, Yunjiao, thank you, I'm busy at the moment, I'll thank you later, Auntie. Peach Blossom, it doesn't matter, right? Gu Yunjiao smiled, she ate less in the morning, and her blood sugar was a little low. In addition, after squatting for a long time, she got up violently again, and the blood supply to her brain was insufficient. I'll be fine afterward. Be careful in the first 3 months. Also, it's best not to. Gu Yunjiao, who had been a virgin for 2 lifetimes, was embarrassed to continue. Qin Shi smiled understandingly, sure, I know, I also gave birth to 3, I know it, I will tell them later. Dehua was supported by her man, and shyly said to Gu Yunjiao, Yunjiao, thank you. Gu Yunjiao waved her hand, you go to rest, it's better to drink a bowl of sugar water when you go back. Zhang Dalan helped Dehua go back. The women and children of the Zhang family, who were watching the excitement, also returned to the fields to continue their work. In the evening, when I came home from work, my family was preparing to eat in the main room. Mrs. Jean brought a basket of 20 eggs over, saying that she thanked Gu Yunjiao for diagnosing the happy pulse for Dehua. Gu Yunjiao stood up, Aunt Jean, take it back quickly, it's really useless for such a thing. Chen Shi also said next to him, it's really not necessary, you are too outlandish next door. At this time, Mrs. Zhou, who was sitting on the top, coughed lightly, the second one, go and put down the eggs, and free up the basket for your sister-in-law Qin. Gu Yunjiao and Chen Shi looked at each other awkwardly, then watched Yang Shi happily took the basket and went in, and took out the empty basket after a while. Qin Shi took the basket and left with a smile. Yang Shi smiled and said, Mother, I got 20 eggs for nothing. Let's fry and eat them tomorrow. After the autumn harvest in the past 2 days, I'm exhausted, so I should eat something good. Zhou Shi spit on her face, what to eat? I said that eggs should be saved for money. Is there a lack of your food and drink at home? It's like a starving ghost reincarnated every day. Yang pursed his lips and did not speak. Gu Yunjiao bowed her head to cook rice, the rules of this era are like this, there is no family division, children are not allowed to have private property, and every copper money earned belongs to this big family. Therefore, Mrs. Zhou can blatantly take the eggs that Aunt Jean gave her to her. The Zhang family worked hard for a few days, and finally all the millet from the 30 acres of land was collected. After drying, the family left food rations for half a year. The rest, a few men took them to the county to pay taxes, and the rest were sold. Zhang Yuzi went to the college in the county and followed him. In the evening, when Mr. Zhang returned home, he handed over the money from the sale to the Zhou family. Zhang Lijian's mother-in-law next door, and son, saw several men from the Zhang family come back with robes on their backs, and her eyes flickered. After a while, he called out to Mrs. Chen at the gate of the courtyard. When Mrs. Chen heard the call, she hurried out, and Aunt Sun smiled and said, "I have something to ask you. Some time ago, your family's Saburo rushed for the exam, and you asked our family to borrow the 10 taels of silver. When will you pay it back?" Aunt Sun smiled and said, "I shouldn't have urged you. It's just that my eldest son wants to talk about his daughter-in-law. Now I'm asking a money matchmaker to find her. I'm optimistic about it, but I'm just waiting for Yinza to hire her. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth." Author, Jinkui. Chapter 30. Chen's face was all red, and he continued, "It's time to pay it back. No, just wait until you sell the millet to pay off the debt. I'll ask my mother-in-law in a moment." Aunt Sun smiled, "Then I'll wait for your letter." Chen Shi turned around and went to the upper room. When he entered the room, Zhou Shi just covered the camphor wood box. Seeing Mrs. Chen come in, she quickly locked the box and turned to look at Mrs. Chen in dissatisfaction. "What are you doing here?" Chen Shi lowered his head. "Mother knows, before Saburo went to Fukan to take an exam, he also borrowed 10 taels of silver from Zhang Lijian's house next door. Auntie Sun from the Zheng family just asked me when the money will be returned, saying that her family plans to marry a daughter-in-law and wait for the money to be used." Zhou Shi pulled his face down as soon as he heard it. "I have no money, don't look for me." Chen Shi was stunned. "Mother, how can you not have money? Didn't you just sell the millet?" Zhou Shi lowered his eyelids. "Haha, I already said that. I will keep the money from selling millet this year, and give me and your father longevity materials." "What, you want to rob even this money?" Chen's face flushed. "Mother, it's not that I want to rob it. I borrowed money from others, and I have to pay it back." Zhou Shi snorted. "I made the money. I asked you to borrow it. I didn't use your money, so I don't care about paying it back." Chen Shi was about to cry. "My mother said at the time that the family only had 10 taels of silver, and Saburo was not enough, so I went to Aunt Sun to borrow it. At that time, my father agreed, and you know it, mother." Zhou Shi lowered her eyes. "It's none of my business anyway." She waved her hand, as if chasing flies. "Let's walk around, don't get in the way here." Chen Shi stood there for a while, his face turned red and white, and he left the room after a while. Gu Yunjiao was sitting by the window, looking at the pulse case brought from her home, when she saw Mrs. Chen walking outside with tears in her eyes. She hurriedly put down her book and walked to the next room, where she saw Mrs. Chen sitting alone at the table, weeping. Gu Yunjiao walked over and said softly, "Mother, what's the matter?" Chen Shi was angry, anxious, and aggrieved, and said the whole thing. "My dowry is all gone, and now there is no money to give to others." She wiped the corners of her eyes. "I can see it through, they are reluctant to spend money on Saburo, and they are waiting for Saburo to become an official in the future." Chen Shi fiercely bought, "How can there be such a beautiful thing in the world?" Gu Yunjiao thought for a while. She had valuable musk deer antler ginseng or something in her medicine store. Just take out a little and exchange it for some money, but she shouldn't take this money, and she won't take it either. She said softly, "Mother, why don't you go to the old man to talk about it? The old man is still sensible. Anyway, he is stronger than Zhou." Chen Shi nodded. "I'm looking for the old man. This family is not divided, and the 6 buckets of rice that Saburo distributes every month are also handed over to the family, and the money owed should be paid by the public." Chen patted Gu Yunjiao's hand, with relief in his eyes. "Sanlang went to study in the county. Luckily I still have you at home, and I have someone to discuss with me in case of trouble. Chen Shi came out of the room and walked around, but he didn't see Mr. Zhang, so he had to keep the matter in his heart. When it was time for dinner, Mr. Zhang came back. After taking a few bites, Ms. Chen couldn't hold back anymore, and said loudly, "Father, today Aunt's son urged our family to return the money, which is the 10 taels of silver that Saburo borrowed from Fukin to catch the exam. You said at the time that you couldn't look down on it. Lijhan, let me go to Aunt's son and tell me that I am a woman so I can talk." The house was quiet.